Hello, everyone. Tonight we're going to take a slow, winding walk through the ancient sands of Egypt, where a game carved into stone could decide the fate of a soul. Imagine flickering oil lamps, warm desert winds whispering through narrow temple halls, and the faint clatter of wooden pawns sliding across a polished board that looks deceptively simple. But here's the twist. You might be surprised to hear this story isn't just about playing games. It's about navigating magic, mystery, and even the afterlife. So before you get cozy and drift off to sleep, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to support us. Now, turn off the lights, close your eyes, relax your body, focus on the story, and enjoy the ride tonight. You shuffle along a dusty corridor, the smell of old stone and incense mingling in the air. The walls are close, humming with age. Somewhere nearby, a candle flickers. You hear it more than see it. A subtle pop and sizzle as oil burns. And then you spot it. A low, square table, smooth and worn, carved directly into the floor. It's a Senet board, 30 small rectangles, laid out like a quiet puzzle. 10 rows of 3, just enough order to trick your brain into thinking it understands the rules. You don't. Not yet. You kneel down. The board is warm to the touch, heat from the desert stones seeping into your palms. Beside it lies a little bowl with 4 flat sticks, blackened at one end. These, you realize, are dice, but not the kind you're used to. No 6-sided cubes, no numbers, just 4 sticks. You toss them experimentally, 3 black sides up. That means what? You get to move 3 spaces? 4? 1? And then another? No one really agrees anymore. Even historians shrug at this point. They've argued over the exact rules for decades. Some say the game changed over time. Some claim we're missing key pieces. And some just quietly admit that ancient Egyptians might have liked messing with future archaeologists. You smile. Because here's the fun part. Senet isn't just a game. It's a metaphor with delusions of grandeur. Every square might represent something cosmic. Life, death, transition, rebirth. Or maybe it's just a place where old men argued over the rules and accused each other of cheating. Both possibilities feel real. In one reconstructed version, you control 5 pawns. Your goal is to move them all across the board and off the other end. Sounds simple, until you realize the last few squares might be haunted. Seriously, some tiles have names like the House of Water or the House of Rebirth. Doesn't sound like Monopoly, does it? And just when you think you've got the hang of it, a cat wanders by, stretches, and knocks over one of your pawns. Ancient cats were sacred, sure, but they were still jerks. You shift again and look around. The room seems abandoned, but there's a presence here. Not spooky, just watchful. Like the game remembers every move ever made on its surface. The air smells faintly of myrrh and something older. Maybe cinnamon. Or maybe it's just dust and your imagination teaming up for a little olfactory theater. You try rolling the sticks again. 2 black, 2 white. That might mean you can move 2 spaces. Or maybe you get to roll again. Depends on which dynasty you're pretending to live in. Here's what scholars do agree on. Senet was one of the oldest known board games in the world. There are images of people playing it in tombs that are over 5,000 years old. That's older than your favorite playlist, your favorite philosopher, or even your favorite conspiracy theory. And strangely, people didn't just play it for fun. They buried it with the dead. Like, a lot. Dozens of boards have been found in tombs, nestled next to pots of honey, jewelry, and sometimes even a second, smaller version of the same board, just in case the afterlife had cramped waiting areas. You can almost hear someone muttering, "What do you mean I can't bring my full-sized game into the boat of Ra?" Fine, here's the travel version. One strange thing to note, many of these boards are incomplete. One or two squares chipped out, a missing piece, one lonely pawn. Historians are still debating whether that was symbolic, or if ancient kids were just as good at losing game pieces under the couch as modern ones. But here, in this imagined night, somewhere between memory and dream, you feel the pull of it. Senet isn't about knowing the rules. It's about feeling them, sensing the moment to move, to wait, to leap forward or slip back. You take a deep breath. The air is dry and warm, like breathing in history itself. There's a deep satisfaction in imagining the lives that pass through here. You see a priest in golden linen robes, bending over the board, his brow furrowed. You see a child giggling, trying to sneak an extra roll. You see a queen, graceful and calm, watching the sticks tumble like tiny bones of fate. And then it's just you again. You place one pawn at the start. You give it a gentle push forward. It scrapes slightly, then stops in a square with a tiny, almost invisible ankh etched into it. Maybe that's good. Maybe that's very bad. You have no idea, but for now, it doesn't matter, because the board is quiet. The candles still flicker. The game has begun. You pause, your hand still resting near the piece on the board. There's something about it, something heavy, but not in weight. More like a strange gravity pulling you in. Not just a game, remember? This was once a sacred ritual. Not for everyone, mind you. Probably not for the baker's apprentice who played it with breadcrumbs for pawns. But for pharaohs? For priests? Oh, they took it very seriously. Senet, you learn, was more than a pastime. It was a spiritual roadmap. Each move might have mirrored the soul's journey through the duat, the Egyptian underworld. And no, it wasn't all fiery pits and tormented screams. The duat was a labyrinthine landscape filled with rivers, gates, gods, riddles, crocodiles, and possibly that one cousin who never RSVPs to weddings. You slide another pawn forward, slowly, like you're testing fate. The square it lands on is blank, but you start to imagine, maybe this is the house of happiness, or the square where you don't die today. Either way, a solid move. In ancient tomb paintings, especially the ones tucked deep beneath desert cliffs, you can spot people playing Senet with a gaze that's intense. Not competitive intense, spiritual intense. Eyes locked, hands hovering, as if the next roll could tilt the scale of Ma'at, the goddess of cosmic order. And here's a wild fact. Some Egyptians believed that playing Senet well in life could prepare your soul for judgment, kind of like celestial practice. You didn't just roll the dice for points. You were demonstrating virtue, strategy, and your readiness to move through divine chaos. No pressure, right? In some texts, Senet is even described as a form of prayer. Each successful move could be a request, a whisper to the gods. Please, O Ra, let me pass the river of knives with dignity and most of my limbs intact. And yet, weirdly, this sacred game eventually made its way to kitchen tables and dusty porches. That's the thing about ancient Egyptian spirituality. It wasn't always locked behind temple doors. Daily life and religion were tangled up like a basket of yarn. You'd say a prayer when baking bread, sing a hymn while planting flax, and yes, play a board game as spiritual prep for death. But back to you. You glance around. The room is still quiet, still bathed in candlelight, with long shadows stretching like lazy cats across the floor. One flame dances slightly, as if amused by your confusion, or perhaps it's cheering you on. You roll the sticks again. This time, they clatter louder. One flips into your lap. It lands white side up. That's 3 white, 1 black. According to one of the theories, the one you're choosing to believe at the moment, that means you move 4 spaces and get to roll again. Congratulations, you're on a hot streak, at least until the gods notice. Now here's where things get spicy. By the New Kingdom era, think King Tut's time, Senet had fully transformed from a leisure activity into a literal afterlife rehearsal. The game boards even started including hieroglyphs on the final 5 squares, each with symbolic meaning. The waters of chaos, the house of rebirth, and more. You imagine a priest whispering over the board as he moves. Through the waters I pass, into the light of Ra. It's poetic. It's eerie. It's kind of beautiful, but it's also weird when you think about it. A board game with rules that might send your soul to eternal peace, or into the jaws of a crocodile demon. What kind of game night is this? Historians are still debating whether everyone believed in this deeper meaning, or whether some people were just like, it's better than counting grains. You shift your knees. The floor is cool now, the stone breathing with ancient memories. You close your eyes for a moment and picture it, the game as part of a funeral. A priest sits beside a coffin, gently moving pawns as chants echo through the chamber. Not a competition, not even entertainment, just a quiet, symbolic path toward resurrection. And here's the twist. People believed the dead themselves might play. Tomb inscriptions refer to games being left for the spirit. Maybe the K, the life force, came back at night to move the pieces. You hope the ghostly opponents were better sports than your uncle during holiday Monopoly. One known tomb, belonging to a noblewoman, even shows her seated before a Senate board, wearing fine linen and eternal calm. She's mid-game, forever. No opponent in sight. Maybe she's winning. Maybe she's been waiting 3,000 years for someone to take the first turn. You're tempted to make a joke here. Something about taking your sweet afterlife time. But the silence around you feels respectful. This is a place of both play and passage. There's one more thing you notice. The deeper you dive into this, the more you realize. No 2 Senate boards are exactly the same. Some are carved into stone floors. Some are sleek and lacquered wood with inlays of ivory or faience. A few are portable, with drawers underneath for storing pieces. Ancient Egyptian Travel Edition. Very thoughtful. But some boards have strange designs, unexpected markings, symbols we don't fully understand. It's like each one carries not just a game, but a personalized spell, which brings up an oddly chilling thought. What if you're not playing it? What if it's playing you? You chuckle at that. Then glance at the sticks. Just for fun, you roll them again and again. You move forward. Toward what? You're not sure yet, but the board knows. You roll the dice sticks one more time. They clatter softly, 4 little clicks like polite applause from an invisible audience. 3 black, 1 white. Your hand hesitates over the pawn. This is the part where things start getting strange. Well, stranger. Because now you're learning that the dice in your hand, those humble flat sticks, weren't just randomizers. Oh no. These were whispers from the divine. Their patterns weren't accidental. They were believed to carry messages from the gods, or from fate, or maybe just from that one ancestor who never stopped micromanaging. Each combination of black and white sides signaled not just movement, but luck, energy, or even divine presence. Throw 4 white sides up? That was rare and special. Some believed it meant you were touched by the hand of a god, which sounds lovely until you realize the gods of Egypt were complicated. One minute they're protecting your soul. The next they're weighing your heart against a feather and offering it as a snack to a crocodile-lion-hippo hybrid. You gently set the pawn down. There's a feeling that this isn't just a game anymore. This is a conversation. One between you and something older. You roll again, curious. 2 white, 2 black. A balanced roll, equally light and dark. Now that's poetic. Ancient Egyptians would sometimes chant during rolls, not loudly, but under their breath, asking for guidance, inviting balance, or, if we're being honest, probably muttering something like, "Please don't let me land on the water square again. I just got out." In fact, in temple versions of Senet, these rolls could affect real-life rituals. Move to the wrong square, and your ceremonial roll might be paused for purification. Move too well, and people got suspicious. Cheating was frowned upon, unless you were royal, in which case it was probably just divine intervention. And speaking of intervention, remember those missing pieces from ancient game sets? Yeah. There's one theory that those weren't lost. They were removed, intentionally. Some scholars suggest that once someone died, a piece was taken off their board to symbolically mark their journey as unfinished or eternal. Historians are still debating whether this was a respectful tradition or just poor inventory management. Either way, you start to feel a little spooked when you notice your own board is 1 piece short. You sit back, eyes scanning the small, tidy rows. One of the middle pawns is gone. Not missing exactly, just never there to begin with. It's probably nothing. Probably. Anyway, back to the dice. You study them again, and it hits you. They're made from split reeds. Lightweight, slightly curved, blackened on one side. Crude compared to modern dice, but somehow more honest. There's no deception here. Just simple materials and divine intent. They tumble how they want. You're just along for the ride. Some recovered sets actually use knuckle bones instead of sticks. Yep. Actual bones. Usually from sheep or goats. There's a whole fascinating bit about how gaming and butchery overlapped in ancient daily life. But let's save that delicious detail for another night. For now, just know this. Dice weren't just tools. They were bridges between chance and destiny. You place one next to your ear, just for fun. Nothing, but still, You feel something, that weird flutter of mystery, like someone's watching you play from a great distance. Someone ancient, wearing gold, possibly judging your strategy. And then there's the weirdest part of all, how seriously they took the roles. In temple games, there may have been officiants just to observe them. Like dice referees, you can imagine some stern priest standing nearby, arms crossed, whispering, "Roll again." You angled your wrist. Mahat frowns on that. You suppress a giggle, but the belief in dice as fate dispensers wasn't unique to Egypt. Around the same time, the Sumerians and Indus Valley folks were getting into dicey business too. It's like every ancient culture agreed on one thing. If you want to understand life, throw some stuff and see where it lands. And Egypt? Egypt added gods to the mix. Take the god Thoth, for example. He was associated with wisdom, writing, and, surprise, divination. Some believe that he watched over Senet games, not because he was bored, but because games, like stories, hold structure. And Thoth loved structure, which means when you roll the dice, maybe you're participating in a story. One move at a time, each step on the board isn't just progress, it's a chapter, and some chapters are weird. One discovered Senet board had an extra square, 31 instead of 30. Historians can't agree on why. Was it a miscalculation, a secret bonus level, or the ancient version of DLC? Another board had snake imagery coiled around its border. Maybe symbolic, maybe decorative, maybe just the carver going through a snake phase. You reach out and trace the edge of your own board. Smooth stone, faint markings. You swear you can see something now, something that wasn't there before. A faint outline of a lotus blossom, or maybe just a water stain. Hard to tell in candlelight. Still, it feels meaningful. You glance again at the dice. They sit in the bowl like they've always been there, waiting, watching, ready. You lean forward, gently. Your fingers brush the pawns. Careful now. This is no longer about winning. It never really was. The board seems simple at first glance. 30 squares laid out like obedient little rectangles. 10 rows, 3 across. You count them with the tip of your finger. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 30. Clean, symmetrical, oddly satisfying. But the longer you stare at it, the more you notice the oddities. Some of the squares look different, not in any flashy way. No blinking lights or glowing tiles, but subtle marks catch your eye. Barely visible symbols, almost like they were scratched in after the board was finished. You pause at square 26. There's something about it, a faded ripple carved there, like water, lapping on the Nile's edge. You've seen this one before in museum photos. Historians call it the House of Waters, and it's infamous for being the most annoying square in the game. You land on it, you're stuck, not forever, but long enough to make you question your life choices. You can only move forward again by rolling the exact number required. If you miss, you stay, floating, waiting, meditating, or sulking. Depends on your personality. Kind of like being in the middle seat on a really long chariot ride. And as your mind drifts, it hits you. This isn't just a design choice. This is symbolism, baby. That square, the watery one, was meant to represent chaos, a liminal space between death and rebirth. or between one bad roll and a really dramatic comeback. Either way, you're not just stuck, you're being tested. In fact, the last 5 squares of the Senet board are a mystery buffet of meaning. Historians believe they represent key stages of the soul's journey. Square 26, the House of Waters, chaos or trial. Square 27, the House of Rebirth, a second chance. Square 28, the House of Triumph, a spiritual checkpoint. Square 29, the House of Glory. Yeah, that one sounds important. Square 30, the House of Reunification with Ra, aka Final Boss Square. Get past all 5, and your soul is considered, what's the phrase, eternally chill. But these names, totally modern guesses. No ancient manual has survived to tell us exactly what the squares meant. We've pieced it together from tomb art, scattered writings, and the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a really vague instruction manual drawn on a wall with eyeliner. Historians are still debating whether all versions of the game even had special squares. Some boards show markings, some don't. Some use animal symbols, others use geometric shapes, and a few just blank. The IKEA coffee table edition of Senet. So here's a comforting thought. Even in ancient times, people probably argued about the rules. Imagine 2 noblemen in 1450 BCE yelling across a courtyard, "That's not the House of Waters, you dolt. That's the bird square." No, your face is the bird square. It helps you feel connected to them, doesn't it? You return to your board. Your pawn is a few spaces away from the final 5. You feel the tension, the sacred stretch, the mythic countdown. And it's not just symbolic. This part of the board played differently. Some versions of the game forced you to land on the final square with an exact roll. No overshooting, no close enough. It was like ancient golf. You had to sink the soul. You imagine the stakes. Your character, your afterlife avatar, poised at square 29. One roll from the finish, from divine peace, from reuniting with Ra, the sun god himself. And you roll too high, back to square 27. That's right. Some versions didn't just keep you in place, they knocked you backward. A real spiritual faceplant. And it wasn't just a mechanical gimmick. It reflected deep beliefs about readiness. You don't just stumble into eternal glory. You earn it. You prove yourself. Or you get bounced back into the chaos like a cosmic game of snakes and ladders. You sit quietly for a moment. It's strange how a few squares can feel so heavy. Like they carry the weight of thousands of lives, thousands of hopes, quietly chiseled into limestone and painted in ochre. You can almost hear the breath of a player from 4,000 years ago, leaning in, concentrating, whispering a prayer to Thoth or Isis before making the final roll. And suddenly, it doesn't feel like a board anymore. It feels like a threshold, a passageway between before and after, between what was and what might be. Even the structure of the board starts to reflect that idea. Some scholars believe the movement on the board zigzagged like a river. You didn't go in a straight line. You flowed, turned, doubled back, just like life, just like the Nile, and just like the soul's journey through the duat. And that zigzag pattern, it's found in other places too, on temple walls, funerary scrolls, even in how some tombs were designed. It's as if the Egyptians were saying, progress isn't linear. Sometimes you move forward, sometimes sideways, sometimes back, but always, always with purpose. Your hand hovers over your pawn. You give it a gentle push, one square closer. You exhale. The air tastes dry and warm, The candles melted down a bit more, casting long, sleepy shadows across the board. You let your eyes close for a second. You're getting close now, not to the end, but to something deeper. The board is more than wood or stone. It's a map of the soul, of the journey, of you. You've made it to the last third of the board now, and things are tense. Not in a horror movie jump scare kind of way. More like the feeling right before you find out if your homemade bread rose properly. Ancient stakes, yes, but also a sense of cozy drama. You hover your hand over your next pawn. This one's been lagging behind, maybe on purpose. Some pieces seem to have a personality. Slow starters, bold leaders, absolute chaos agents. This one? Quiet, sneaky. Might be planning something. As you roll the sticks again, you're suddenly aware of how watched you feel. Not in a creepy way, just noted. Like the game itself is paying attention. And according to a surprising number of Egyptologists, that might not be so far-fetched. See, some Senet boards weren't just decorated, they were inhabited. Deities were often painted right onto the board. On certain squares, watching, waiting, judging your moves. Ra, Thoth, Osiris, all the big names. Square 27, often labeled the House of Rebirth, was associated with Osiris, god of the dead, and also of regeneration. Landing there might have been considered a blessing, or a test, maybe both. And let's not forget Maat, the feather-balancing goddess of truth and order. She'd definitely have opinions about skipping turns or fudging a roll. And here's a fun, weird detail. Some boards show gods holding game pieces. That's right. Deities weren't just watching. They were playing. Talk about divine multitasking. There's even a theory that Senet wasn't originally designed as a spiritual tool at all. Just a fun pastime. But over centuries, it got absorbed into Egyptian religious life. Like that one pop song that accidentally becomes a wedding anthem. Historians are still debating whether the earliest players saw the gods in their pawns or just saw pawns. Whether it started as spiritual practice or picked up sacred baggage as it traveled through dynasties. You roll again. 4. The sneaky pawn advances. It lands on a square with a little bird carved into it. A heron, maybe? Or possibly a vulture. In ancient Egypt, those two could mean wildly different things. One stood for rebirth, the other for divine protection. Or was it the other way around? You lean in. The carving is faint but precise. Whoever etched this board had a steady hand, and likely a steady belief that the gods were watching their craftsmanship. It makes sense, doesn't it? When every part of life feels spiritually significant, you don't just build a game, you build a universe in miniature. A battlefield, a classroom, a chapel, and suddenly you feel very small next to it. There's a quiet moment as you trace your finger along the edge of the board. Dust tickles your knuckle. The air smells warm again, like old stone and faded myrrh. You remember reading once that some tombs had Senet boards built into the furniture, carved into benches, inlaid into travel chests. They weren't just tools for the dead, they were companions for the living. People played by lamplight, on rooftops, in temples, and every move might have mattered. You lift another pawn. This one feels heavier, not physically, emotionally, as if its backstory is longer than the others. You can almost imagine the life behind it. A merchant, a priestess, a particularly savvy teenager who played for candy. You guide it forward. 1 square, 2. It rests on square 28, one of the final houses, the House of Triumph. You whisper, nice. This was likely the point in the game when players started whispering prayers. Quiet ones, not big temple songs, just little murmurs to the universe. Let this move be right. Let me pass safely. Let my soul be seen. Because here's the secret no one really says out loud. They weren't just playing to win. They were playing to be worthy. And somehow, that energy lingers. Even now, even here. You suddenly remember the board found in Tutankhamun's tomb. It was stunning. Ivory, ebony, gold inlays. Not just a game set. It looked like a treasure. Because to the boy king, that board was a treasure. A guidebook. A passport. Maybe even a map to Ra's heavenly lounge. And here you are, playing a quiet, candle-lit version of the same thing. It's humbling and kind of sweet. You lean back, listening to the sounds around you. The candle crackles. A breeze outside stirs the papyrus reeds. Or maybe that's your imagination again. The line between here and then is getting very thin. You look down. The pawns are arranged just so. Some bunched up, some advancing, some uncertain. They're all on the board, but not all at the same part of the journey. Just like us, some of us are at the start, just learning how to roll. Some are stuck in the House of Waters, learning to be still. And a few, just a few, are inching their way toward Ra's waiting embrace. No one's better, just somewhere different. That's what makes this board so strangely comforting. You can't win by rushing. You can't cheat your way to enlightenment. You move when you're meant to. And when you don't, you wait. With grace, if you can. With snacks, if you're lucky. You roll again. 1 white, 3 black. Your pawn moves to the penultimate square. The House of Glory. You don't cheer. You don't celebrate. You just breathe. You're almost there. The House of Glory sits beneath your pawn like a golden invitation. You're just 1 square away from the end. 1 square from the so-called House of Reunification with Ray, square 30. The final space, the end of the road. You'd think the finish line would feel triumphant, even sparkly. But instead, it's quiet, still. Like standing on a cliff edge at dawn, watching the sun stretch across the desert. You wait before rolling. Let the moment breathe. There's something strange about how all Senet boards, no matter how fancy or homemade, seem to be missing one thing. 1 piece. 1 pawn. 1 square slightly worn more than the rest. It's a pattern, oddly consistent across decades of excavation. At first glance, it just looks like wear and tear. You know, the way your favorite coffee mug always has 1 little chip, or that 1 sock disappears forever into the washing machine void. But historians, they've noticed. 1 pawn, gone, over and over. Some think it's symbolic, maybe a ritual, maybe a way of acknowledging the unpredictability of death. Like, hey, not everyone gets to finish the game. Let's leave this last piece behind, just in case they need it. Others say it was superstition. Maybe if you removed 1 pawn, you'd avoid being the next one sent to the afterlife. And of course, some say it's just because people lose stuff. Historians are still debating whether the missing pieces were part of a deeper funerary tradition, or just the ancient version of leaving game parts under the couch. You take a look at your own board again. Sure enough, you're 1 pawn short. It's not unsettling, just noticeable. Like someone left a chair empty at dinner for a guest who never arrives. You roll the sticks, 2 white, 2 black, a perfect 4. The pawn slides into the final square with no resistance. Like it belongs there. Like it was always going to end up in that house of Ra, bathed in candlelight and mystery. You sit back, not victorious, but reverent. Because here's the real twist. Winning in Senet wasn't about beating someone else. It was about escaping chaos, finding cosmic balance, moving through Ma'at's divine truth, and exiting the board with your dignity intact. The game wasn't about dominance. It was about readiness. You look down again, and the board seems to have changed. Not physically, not in any obvious way, but in feel. The energy's softer, like it's gone to sleep. Your other pawns are still in play, but this one, this little traveler, is done. You imagine it passing through a sunbeam, shimmering out of existence, or into a better one. Maybe the missing piece wasn't lost. Maybe it simply made it. That's the thing with these boards. They weren't mass-produced. They weren't part of a grand corporate strategy to keep people hooked until 2 a.m. with expansion packs. Every board was handmade, every game personal. Some were used in temples, others at kitchen tables, and each one had a story. One board, found in a tomb near Abydos, had paw prints etched into the wood, not painted, real ones. A cat, maybe, or a jackal cub. Either way, it had walked across the game as it dried, immortalizing its tiny mischief forever. It's a strange comfort, isn't it? That even a priest's holy game could be interrupted by a 4-legged troublemaker. Another board was found half-finished, the grid carved, but the symbols never filled in. Maybe the artist died, or maybe the piece was buried intentionally, like an open-ended question for the afterlife to answer. You lift the pawn gently off the board and place it to the side. Done. And then you glance over at the others, still waiting. Time for another round? You roll again. The sticks fall awkwardly this time. One lands on its side. You chuckle softly. That probably broke 10 sacred rules. But you pick it up anyway, because what else can you do? The ancient Egyptians were masters of symbolic duality, life and death, chaos and order, movement and stillness. Even their gods were contradictions wrapped in gold. Thoth the wise prankster, Bastet the cuddly war goddess, Set the destroyer who occasionally saved the world when no one else felt like it. So maybe the missing piece is part of that duality too. It's not there. And that matters. And it doesn't. And that matters too. You remember reading about one Senet board discovered with a strange note scratched into the underside. A few hieroglyphs, loosely translated, it meant something like, "The journey does not end here." Poetic, or maybe the world's oldest marketing slogan for a sequel. Either way, you believe it, because even though one pawn has made it, the others are still rolling, still stuck in waters, or wrestling with rebirth, or waiting at the edge of glory. The board is never really empty, and maybe that's the point. You shuffle your seated position on the cool floor, joints cracking softly like old papyrus. The game is halfway played now. Some pawns have made it far. One has even reached the house of reunification. But there's still so much board left. And tonight, you're not alone. Or at least, it doesn't feel that way. You glance at the wall. A faint painting glows in the candlelight, barely visible, but unmistakable once your eyes adjust. It's Queen Nefertari. She's not sitting on a throne. She's not holding a scepter or surrounded by servants. She's seated at a low table, head slightly tilted, hand reaching toward a Senet board, a queen, immortalized in the act of playing a board game. The fresco lives in her tomb, one of the most beautiful ever discovered, buried deep in the Valley of the Queens. The colors are still vibrant, her robes flowing like liquid moonlight, her expression calm and intent. And yes, she's mid-move. It's one of the rare times we see royalty so normal. No smiting enemies, no chariots, just a game board and a woman thinking, which piece should I move next? There's something deeply human in that. Imagine it. The Queen of Egypt, surrounded by symbols of divine power, quietly agonizing over a bad roll. Not the House of Waters again. Historians are still debating whether this depiction of her playing was symbolic, religious, or simply personal. Some say it represents her spiritual journey through the afterlife. Others think it was just her favorite pastime, a comfort, a joy, and maybe, just maybe, both are true. After all, in ancient Egypt, daily life and sacred ritual weren't separate. You could grind grain while praying, bathe with intention, laugh with the gods. You roll again, pretending Nefertari is across from you, her fingers painted with kohl, her gold rings clinking gently as she moves a pawn. You wonder if she had a favorite piece, a lucky charm, or if she too complained about her opponent cheating. You roll a 3. Your pawn lands squarely on one of the final tiles, the House of Triumph. You raise your eyebrows. Nice, you whisper, as if Nefertari might approve from across the centuries. And why not? She was known for her wisdom and grace. Her tomb speaks not just of wealth, but of wit, of devotion, of a life lived with poise. And if the stories are true, Ramses II adored her deeply, enough to fill the walls of her tomb with poetry and paint her not as a goddess, but as a player. There's something bold in that. This wasn't just a queen being memorialized for her crown. She was remembered for her mind, for her love of play, for her mastery of a game that carried meaning across time. And here's something strange you learn the more you dive into Senet lore. The game wasn't gendered. Both men and women played. Pharaohs and farmers, priests and children. It wasn't a male-dominated intellectual pursuit. It was something everyone could do. That in itself is quietly revolutionary. You imagine the queen at dusk, after temple rituals and courtly decisions, setting up her board by lamplight, rolling the sticks, letting herself simply be. No ceremony, no crown, just the game. A moment of stillness in a whirlwind of power. You glance again at your own board. Your pieces don't move this time. You just look, feel, breathe. Something about her painted face watching over the scene, calm, observant, makes you hesitate. Not out of fear, out of respect, out of understanding that this game is old, yes, but also tender. One recovered Senet board was found buried alongside a woman's mirror and her coal pot. A delicate touch, as if someone believed she'd want both beauty and strategy in the next world. Or maybe just to look great while crushing her afterlife opponents. And that's what's so captivating about these quiet discoveries. They tell you not just what people believed, but what they loved. Senet wasn't just about gods and glory. It was about laughter over tea. It was about memory. About a queen who might have played with her children, or challenged a visiting noble to a quick match between ceremonies. You imagine the sound of it. Pieces tapping on polished wood, faint giggles behind veils, the clatter of stick dice echoing softly through painted halls, The next roll comes slowly. Your pawn moves one space forward. Not much, but enough. There's no rush. Because when you think about it, maybe the goal isn't to win. Maybe the goal is to keep playing, to stay on the board, to let each move be its own reward. You picture Nefertari finishing her game, gently brushing her hand across the last square. Not triumphant, just peaceful. She leans back, smiles. The game ends, and that's enough. You sit back a little, resting your weight on your palms as the glow from the candle pools low and lazy across the board. The game is deep in its rhythm now. The kind of rhythm where rules start to feel like instinct, and the sound of the stick dice clattering becomes a kind of lullaby, like the Nile itself, flowing in soft curves between palm-lined banks. But tonight, something feels different. You hear voices, not real ones, just echoes. Faint, gossipy little ghosts from long ago, drifting through the game like wind under a tent flap. And they're arguing. Apparently, someone's been cheating, not you, hopefully. You shift, amused, and imagine the scene. A palace garden at dusk. Two nobles hunched over an ornate Senet board. Dates and figs nearby, servants keeping a discreet distance as the tension builds. "I saw you move that piece backwards," one says, sipping wine like it's an accusation. "I most certainly did not," the other replies, with the icy calm only a very rich person can muster while lying through their teeth. Because here's something you may not have guessed. Cheating in ancient Egyptian board games? Totally a thing. Not always out of malice. Sometimes just creative interpretation. The rules of Senet were famously flexible. They changed over time and from house to house. Think of it like the modern equivalent of house rules in Monopoly. Some people play with free parking cash. Others use it as a battlefield. And somewhere, someone is definitely trying to trade Baltic Avenue for Boardwalk again. Historians have found writings suggesting that in some eras, Senet wasn't just played at home, but in temples and courts. Even high-ranking officials got involved. And when prestige is at stake, well, so is reputation. So yeah, cheating wasn't unheard of. You pick up a pawn, move it back one square, then immediately reverse it. "Oops," you mutter. Slip of the hand. The gods are probably raising an eyebrow. Interestingly, some boards actually encouraged a bit of trickery. One square, possibly the 27th, may have allowed you to send your opponent's piece back if you landed just right. A spiritual smite, if you will. Imagine the drama. "Oh, you just landed on my piece? Slide back to the waters with you." Senet, where vengeance is ritual and totally polite. There's a playful cruelty to it. And yet, the Egyptians didn't seem to see this as immoral. To them, the gods themselves could be tricky. Ma'at represented truth and balance, yes. But Set, the chaos god, was still invited to cosmic barbecues now and then. Balance wasn't about perfection. It was about recognizing that even mischief had a place. And so, a well-timed rule bend, well, maybe it was just divine strategy. You lean in again, watching your pieces closely. One sits near the center. Another waits in the water square, still stuck, still floating. But now, you think maybe it's not punishment. Maybe it's preparation, because that's how life works sometimes. You pause. You watch everyone else move ahead. And then, just when you're about to give up, you roll a 4 and leap straight to Rebirth. One particularly funny story comes from a set of tomb fragments near Deir el Medina. The wall art showed two men playing Senet, with one looking dramatically offended. Above him, hieroglyphs translating roughly to, "He has moved without rolling." Scandalous. Whether it was a joke or a genuine complaint, it's proof. Ancient players took the game seriously. And maybe that's the charm of it, how something so sacred could still spark petty rivalries and humble arguments over whose turn it really was. It makes you wonder, how many kings sat cross-legged on silk cushions, smugly accusing generals of cheating while their armies waited outside? And did anyone ever flip the board? There's no direct evidence of that. No archaeologist has found a game board snapped in half and buried in shame. But you know someone had to. You can't tell us humanity's oldest board game survived 3,000 years without at least one well-timed rage quit. Even priests played, in their own overly complicated ways. One papyrus suggests that in temple settings, the game became less about movement and more about recitation. Certain squares required chants. Others asked for offerings. If you landed on square 28, maybe you had to praise the Eye of Horus. If you reached square 29, perhaps you had to pause and reflect, either aloud or in silence, before continuing. It's hard to tell where gameplay ended and ritual began. And maybe that's the point, because Senet wasn't designed to be won like modern games. It was built to be experienced as performance, as memory, as a map through the spirit's winding corridors. And if a little cheating helped grease the cosmic wheels, well, who's to say Ra wasn't winking the whole time? You roll again. 2 white, 2 black. A clean move. Your pawn inches forward, bumping into another. You squint. Technically, you should move around it. But also, no one's watching, except Queen Nefertari, and the candle, and that one ghost who's still mad about the time he got booted from the House of Glory. You sigh. Slide your pawn legally. There's something honest about playing fair, even when no one sees. You smile. This time, you don't need to cheat. You glance back at the board. Your pawn has made it through the tricky middle squares. Another one hovers near the end. But a few, they're stuck, still in limbo. And that's okay. The game has a rhythm now. Forward, pause, fall back, forward again, just like the journey of the soul. Because tonight, you finally see it. Senet wasn't just a game. It was a simulation, a rehearsal, a soul-sorting system wrapped in a hobby, a divine obstacle course with stick dice. And the stakes? Oh, just the afterlife. No pressure. You pick up one of the middle pawns, let it hover above the board for a moment, then gently set it down in the square 25. One space from the House of Waters. You wince. Here comes the hard part, because once you hit the final 5 squares, the afterlife zone, if you will, every move carries more weight. You're not just rolling to advance. You're rolling to become, to prove, to survive. You take a breath, because according to ancient belief, getting to the end of the board wasn't a mere victory. It was a cosmic passport. You're not just trying to escape the game. You're trying to pass through the veil of death itself. Get stuck in the wrong square? You could be eaten by Amit. Yes, that Amit. The crocodile lion hippo monster with a serious appetite for unworthy hearts. Charming. In the Book of the Dead, Amit is said to appear during the final judgment, when your soul is weighed against a feather. Too heavy with sin? Chomp. But some historians believe that Senet was a pre-judgment warm-up, a little trial run. Fail the board, and you might not even reach the feather test. You roll the sticks again. 3 white, 1 black. Nice, a good move. Your pawn skips the dreaded water square entirely. It lands in the House of Rebirth. Square 27. You breathe easier. You've made it to one of the final 5. Now things get symbolic. Each of these last squares had a different meaning, though. No surprise. Historians still debate the details. Some say Square 27 was a moment of reflection. Others say it meant your soul had to perform a task. Maybe offer a prayer. Maybe confess. Maybe just be ready. There are ancient depictions of players landing there and pausing, hand on chin, like a philosopher in linen. You do the same, just for effect. Because this game wasn't designed for speed, you had to earn your way out. The next square, House of Triumph, Square 28, was often marked with an eye or a symbol of vision. The soul could see clearly now. The chaos had passed. If you reached this square, you'd earned spiritual clarity, or at least some bragging rights at the next pyramid brunch. Square 29, the House of Glory, often marked with a star or a sunburst. Here, the soul was victorious, elevated, just one square away from merging with the divine. And then, Square 30, the House of Reunification with Ra. The final step, the escape, the spiritual mic drop. You look over your pieces. A few are close. A few are still crawling. And yet, the mood has shifted. Earlier, the board felt playful. Now, it feels reverent, quiet, like it's watching you instead of the other way around. You run a fingertip along the final row of squares. The stone is smoother here, almost polished by use, or reverence, or time. You think back to one particular artifact, a Senet board recovered from a Theban tomb, beautifully carved, but with an odd inscription on the back. To play is to remember. To finish is to awaken. No one's sure what it meant, but it sounds beautiful and kind of ominous, and maybe true. Because when you really think about it, Senet wasn't just teaching players how to win, it was teaching them how to let go. Of fear, of ego, of control. You rolled the dice. You moved. You tried. You failed. You tried again. Until one day, the final square appeared, and you stepped into the light. In one ancient myth, Ra journeys through the underworld each night, battles serpents, dodges chaos. And then, if all goes well, he emerges in the morning sky, reborn. That's what Senet is, a sunrise in 30 squares. You smile, not because the game is over, but because it's not. You roll again, 2 white, 2 black. Your piece advances one final space. Square 30. You set it down gently and sit in the quiet that follows. Because that's the rule, spoken or not. When a soul reaches the end, you let the board rest. The board sits still now. The final pawn has made its quiet leap into the House of Reunification. And for a moment, it feels like everything should stop. Game over. Curtain closed. Cosmic victory unlocked. But then, a noise. Not a divine trumpet or heavenly chorus. Just a rustle outside. A breeze nudging a reed curtain. A cat yawning somewhere in the distance. Life goes on, and so does the game. Because not everyone played Senet to escape the afterlife. Some played it at lunchtime, in sandals, with bad posture and crumbs in their lap. Not for rebirth, but for fun. Hard to believe, right? But it's true. As sacred as the game could be, it was also a casual pastime for everyday people. You shift your gaze from the ceremonial boards, from queens and priests and cosmic rebirth, and now you imagine something simpler. You're in a small, dusty market square. A little table has been propped up with a brick under one leg. Two kids, barefoot and sunburned, are hunched over a scratched-up Senet board, squabbling. That's not how Grandma plays. She's wrong. She beat you last time. She cheated. Classic. And just like that, you're reminded. Senet wasn't always serious. Sure, the royal versions were inlaid with ivory and gold, but most Egyptians, they carved the boards into stone steps, wooden planks, even scratched them into the dirt, if that's all they had. No pawns, no problem. You could use pebbles, lentils, bits of broken pottery, whatever you could find that didn't roll away when the wind blew. And the rules, wildly inconsistent. Some neighborhoods had their own spin. Some families passed down secret moves. Others made it up as they went along. Sound familiar? It's kind of comforting, isn't it? That one of the oldest games in the world was also one of the most flexible. You can almost hear the daily soundtrack of the market. Goats bleating. A woman haggling over onions. A distant priest singing a hymn. And in the middle of it all, clack clack. Children laughing as they move pieces across 30 ancient squares. Maybe the gods smiled just as much at that version of Senet. After all, the Egyptians had a deep appreciation for joy. They loved music, parties, wine, and good jokes, even in the temples. A little chaos wasn't a sin. It was part of the balance. One surviving poem even encourages people to make a day joyful, forget tomorrow, and play. And that's what the game became. Yes, it held spiritual meaning. Yes, it carried the weight of eternity. But also, it was fun. It was social. It was life. You picture a young potter, knees dusty, taking a break in the shade to challenge his cousin to a quick round. A merchant's daughter learning to count by playing with her brother. A midwife carving a quick board into the floor of her home just to distract a nervous child. No fancy boards, no sacred intent, just the rattle of sticks and the clink of pawns and laughter. One board, found near a workshop in Memphis, had rough carvings and mismatched squares. But underneath, someone had scratched a name. Teddy's Game. Whether Teddy was the maker or the player, no one knows. But the pride was there. Ownership, love, maybe even trash talk. Historians believe these casual boards were the most common, far more than the royal tomb relics. They were just more likely to vanish. Weathered, burned, recycled into roofing. But for a brief time, they were part of everyday life. As natural as bread, as common as sandals. And here's the best part. Senet wasn't only played by the people, it was played between them, across class lines, across generations, even across regions. It spread from village to village, temple to temple, eventually all the way beyond Egypt. Early versions have been found in Canaan and Cyprus, suggesting the game traveled along trade routes like spice or linen. Some say it became something entirely different in other lands. New names, new rules, but always 30 squares, some kind of movement and meaning. Historians are still debating whether these were authentic exports or mere coincidences. But the truth is, once a game becomes beloved, it finds its way, just like chess or soccer or interpretive dance flash mobs. You roll again. No stakes now, just movement. Your pawn, one of the younger ones, is mid-board, still early in its journey. It skips forward, landing on an unmarked square. You smile. No sacred chant needed, just a good roll. You wonder if the neighborhood kids ever invented their own endings. Maybe they didn't want to be reborn. Maybe they just wanted to win a piece of fruit or avoid chores. And in that way, the game stayed alive. Not because it was rigid, but because it could be anything. Sacred ritual, friendly challenge, a lesson in patience, a sneaky form of math class, a shared joke, a soft place to land when life got heavy. The board, simple as it was, held space for all of it. You take one last look around your imaginary marketplace. The voices rise and fall. Someone wins. Someone throws a stick in frustration. Someone starts over. And the board, it just keeps going. 30 squares, infinite meanings. You roll the sticks again. A soft, familiar clatter. This time, you're not thinking about the score or even the win. You're looking at the board like it's a puzzle you've never quite solved. Because tonight, it's not just squares and pawns anymore. It's language, a kind of storytelling told in rows and patterns. And suddenly, you start to notice the beasts. Yes, beasts. Some surviving Senet boards feature strange little creatures carved into their squares. Birds, crocodiles, cobras, even scorpions. Not random decorations. Symbols, warnings, maybe rules. You lean closer to your imaginary board. One square, square 20 maybe, has a bird on it. Not detailed, just enough to see the beak. A falcon, a duck, or maybe something else entirely. One theory is that these animal symbols acted like triggers. Land on the bird, maybe you skip a turn, or maybe you gain a turn, or maybe you have to flap your arms until someone laughs. Historians aren't sure, which makes it fun. They're still debating whether the animals were literal or metaphorical. If the cobra square was meant to represent danger or wisdom, if the scorpion was poison or just persistence with extra legs. You move a piece and imagine it stepping onto a snake square. Do you hiss? Do you retreat? Or do you fight? It's fascinating that the same culture that gave us Anubis and Horus also put tiny symbolic beasts in their board games, like little reminders. Hey, the world's a jungle. Better bring snacks. And the symbols didn't stop with animals. Some boards had simple dots. Others had entire hieroglyphs, ankhs, eyes, reeds. Some even included phrases. Tiny prayers, cryptic instructions. Like the world's oldest fortune cookie stuck inside a game. You might land on a square that reads, "He who waits shall cross." Cool, poetic. But cross what exactly? The river of the dead? The market street at noon? Your cousin's patience? Again, no one knows for sure, and that's the delicious weirdness of it. Playing Senet was like decoding a message that had been half erased. But instead of feeling frustrated, the ancient Egyptians leaned into it. They let the mystery be part of the charm. You pick up a pawn, hold it for a moment. It's just a shape. But in your hands, it becomes something more, a little vessel of meaning, a traveler. And you start to realize, Senet was a symbolic language. 30 squares, multiple layers. If you were a kid, maybe it taught you numbers and patience. If you were a priest, maybe it taught you purity and judgment. If you were a scribe, maybe you saw it as a metaphor for writing itself. A sequence of symbols that moved, revealed, and transformed. And if you were a regular person, maybe it was just a good excuse to sit outside, argue with your neighbor, and take a break from hauling bricks for the latest pyramid. You roll again. This time, your piece lands on a square with a tiny star etched into it. You pause. There's no official definition for this symbol. But some Egyptologists guess that a star might mean illumination, insight, or even just a lucky bounce. You decide your pawn feels enlightened. It stands a little taller now. Probably reads scrolls for fun. You smile, because this is the heart of it, right? Senet was never one thing. It wasn't just a game, or a ritual, or a metaphor, or a community tradition. It was all of it, and more. The animal symbols weren't just graphics. They were choices. Land on a falcon? Fly ahead. Land on a crocodile? Maybe lose a piece. Land on a blank square? That's the universe telling you to figure it out on your own. Kind of like life. One recovered board from the late period had no symbols at all. Just 30 plain squares, each stained from years of play. The only decoration? A single line of hieroglyphs on the side. It read, "The soul journeys best without guides." Oof, deep cut, ancient Egypt. Thanks. You place another piece on the board, somewhere in the middle. No animals here. Just an ordinary square. And yet, it feels significant, because the further you go in the game, the more you realize the plain squares are just as important as the fancy ones. The normal moments carry just as much meaning as the big cosmic milestones: birth, death, crocodile square, but also lunch with friends, a nap by the river, a long, silent move forward. Every square matters. Every beast has a lesson. You let your hands rest on your knees, eyes soft in the candlelight. The game isn't speaking loudly now, just humming, soft, steady, like an old story you've heard before. But this time, you understand it differently. The candles burned low now, wax curling like ancient papyrus around its base. The game board casts long shadows, like the sun setting over the pyramids, soft, stretched, and a little theatrical. You reach for the dice again, 4 little sticks with their half-charred sides and worn edges. They feel comfortable in your palm. Familiar, like a set of bones you've rolled 100 times before in 100 different lifetimes. You roll, 2 black sides up, 2 white, balanced, and the game continues. Tonight, you're in a temple, not a dusty alley or the corner of a marketplace, but a proper, sacred, incense-filled, sunbeam through stone pillars kind of place. And in the far corner of that temple, 3 priests sit in a circle, heads bowed over an elegant Senet board. But this isn't the casual peanut gallery version of the game. No, this is Senet Temple Edition. You creep a little closer, just mentally, of course, drawn by the low hum of chanting. The priests aren't laughing or arguing. They're reciting. Each roll is accompanied by murmured prayers. Each piece is moved with careful precision, like part of a ritual dance. And that's because it is. In some temples, particularly those honoring Thoth, the god of wisdom, Senet was more than symbolic. It was liturgical, sacred. Every roll was a reflection of divine will. Every pawn, a stand-in for the soul of the player, making its way across the board, not just through life or death, but through levels of spiritual refinement. And the stakes? Let's just say, higher than average. Some of the temple versions of Senet included actual chants written into the gameplay. Square 15 might require a verse from the Book of the Dead. Square 28 might trigger a full hymn. Land on the final square? Recite the soul's offering of truth before Ma'at. And if you didn't move. Harsh, but fair. You roll your own sticks again, quietly in solidarity with your imagined priestly counterparts. You wonder, was it competitive? Did they keep score? Or was it more like a shared meditation? Like Tai Chi with pawns? Historians believe temple games weren't about winning. They were about tuning yourself, aligning your personal energy with the divine order of the universe. Called Ma'at, Not just balance in gameplay, but balance in thought, speech, behavior. Think of it as cosmic Sudoku with a spiritual upgrade. You look down at your board. It's not fancy. No inlaid turquoise, no gold filigree. But for a moment, it feels like it belongs in a temple. You move one of your pawns with reverence. Square 24, just one before the final stretch. You exhale slowly because here's something odd. In those temple matches, not everyone got to play. Sometimes only the head priest or a specially chosen initiate could touch the pieces. Others would just watch, observe, absorb. It was a privilege and a test, because to be chosen to play Senet in the temple meant that you weren't just spiritually awake, you were trusted. One story from a minor temple near Abydos mentions a young priest who played Senet to determine if he was ready for initiation. The game lasted 3 days. On the morning of the fourth, he passed both the board and the temple's threshold. Talk about performance anxiety. You look back at your imaginary priests. One of them just rolled a 4. His pawn crosses into the house of triumph, and the others nod solemnly, like he just gave a TED talk on enlightenment. There's no applause, just stillness. Because in a sacred game, every move is a message. Another twist. Some scholars believe temple Senet boards had extra squares. Yep, not always 30. Some had hidden chambers, bonus tiles, tucked away in the carvings. These might have been used to test the sharpness of memory or the purity of one's focus. Miss the sign, and you were sent back, or worse, told to sweep the temple floor. We can't confirm that last part, but it feels right. You roll again. This time, just one white stick. You move your pawn gently, square 25. Now it's serious. You're on the threshold of the final 5, the last part of the board, the sacred runway to rebirth. And you wonder, in the temple, did they ever not finish? Did a priest ever land on square 26 and just stop? Let the pawn stay there forever, floating in the waters until the next player came along? Some boards, after all, were deliberately buried mid-game, as if to say, this journey's not done yet, but the soul will return. There's something beautiful in that idea, that a soul might pause. Wait, choose when to cross. You sit quietly for a moment, letting the silence settle around you, like incense smoke curling through a sandstone corridor. Your board is still. Your pieces are ready. And for now, that's enough. Because you're not rushing the end. You're playing the game. And the game, it's watching you too. The stick dice rest in your hand, warm now from the hours of play. Like old stones found in a riverbed. You roll them once more, softly, without ceremony. The click-clack echoes gently in the quiet room. 1 white, 3 black. A slow move. You advance the piece on square 25, now stepping into the threshold square of the final stretch. Square 26, the infamous House of Waters. You wince a little, half expecting the pawn to groan under its breath. Back in the day, that move might have been the difference between eternal salvation and a surprise meeting with a crocodile-lion-hippo hybrid. Because, you see, Senet didn't stay in Egypt. It traveled, like pottery shards and stories. It moved along the pulse lines of trade, across the desert, over the water into foreign hands. And in those hands, something curious happened. Senet changed. Its symbols morphed. Its pieces were replaced with local variants. Stone discs, flat pebbles, carved tokens. Sometimes the grid shifted. Sometimes the number of squares varied. But the soul of the game? Somehow, it lingered. Boards resembling Senet have been found in Canaanite cities, on the island of Cyprus, even in regions of Nubia. Different materials, different customs, but something familiar. 30-ish squares, pieces racing across, trying to escape the last row. Historians are still debating whether these foreign boards were true Senet or spiritual cousins. Was it cultural export? Or were other civilizations simply making their own divine game night versions? Maybe both. One thing is clear. The game had gravity. Wherever it landed, people wanted to play, and it adapted, like a myth, retold in a new accent. In some places, Senet became rougher, more like checkers. In others, more symbolic, closer to oracle boards or tools of divination. In a few rare finds, boards were designed as double-sided, one side for daily play, the other for funerary ritual. Flip it over when someone dies. A literal game of life and death. You look back at your own board. It's still very much Egyptian in design. But now, you can imagine it elsewhere. On a Phoenician trading vessel, stashed beneath barrels of oil and papyrus scrolls. On a dusty stone porch in Cyprus, with seagulls squawking nearby and someone yelling, "That's not how my uncle plays." You smile, because games are like people. They migrate, they evolve, they pick up strange habits in new environments. And the coolest part? Senet may have inspired future games we still play today. Some scholars have drawn parallels between Senet and the Indian game Pachisi, or even backgammon. Similar goals, similar strategies. Race across the board, survive the gauntlet, get all your pieces home. Sound familiar? It should. Humans love the thrill of progress, of chase, of narrowly escaping doom while outmaneuvering a friend or fate. It's comforting to know that this has always been true, that somewhere, thousands of years ago, a trader and a farmer sat under a fig tree, arguing about whether Square 29 needed a perfect roll to win, that across centuries and empires, we've never stopped marking lines on tables, rolling strange dice, and turning pieces into tiny travelers, the sacred and the silly, side by side. You roll again, another modest toss. Your piece remains in the house of waters, waiting, floating. Maybe it's waiting for permission, or maybe it just likes the view. You picture a merchant teaching a foreign dignitary to play Senet in a courtyard filled with incense and goats. The dignitary, confused but fascinated, squints at the board. And the crocodile means what? Again? Oh, that square? That's just bad luck. Trust me. Stay out of the water. The game becomes a gift, a shared language. No need to speak the same tongue. The sticks do the talking. That's the power of play. One uncovered board from a Levantine site had Greek letters etched alongside Egyptian ones, dual labeled, bilingual, a mashup, maybe used by traders, or by a multilingual family trying to teach both their cultures through something they could share. You imagine the first move ever made on that board. A cautious hand, a curious smile, a roll that echoed through two different worlds. And tonight, here you are, rolling again, a quiet thump. This time, your pawn moves out of the water square, onto the house of rebirth. Well played. You sit back and let the idea linger. That this game, this humble, sacred, scrappy, migrating thing, survived because it never belonged to one place. It lived wherever it was played, and that includes here, now, with you. Your fingers hover over the board now. There's only one pawn left. One last little traveler still making its way across the dusty path. All the others have reached the end, slipped off into whatever comes next. But this one's taking its sweet time. A stubborn piece, or maybe a thoughtful one. It lingers around square 18, just before the final stretch begins. You roll. 2 white, 2 black. You slide it gently forward, one deliberate move, and in your mind, the scene changes. Now you're in a courtyard, somewhere between shade and sun. Clay tiles beneath your knees, warm but not hot. A jar of beer sweats in the corner. Someone nearby hums a tune as they braid a basket, and seated across from you, a friend, someone you've known for years, or maybe someone you met this morning. They're smiling because you're losing, but you don't care, because tonight's game isn't about winning. It's about company. It's about showing up. In ancient Egypt, Senet wasn't always a solitary reflection of the soul. It was a social game, too. Played in homes, markets, even festivals. And when people lost, they didn't scream. They didn't flip the board. They laughed. They poured another drink. They rolled again. They insulted each other's strategy with dry sarcasm, and occasionally threw out an impromptu hymn to Horus, just for good measure. We know this because of the art. There's a tomb painting where a man leans so hard into a Senet move that he nearly falls into his opponent's lap. Both are mid-laugh. No ceremonial garb. No incense smoke. Just 2 dudes, some pawns, and a very intense game. And that, dear listener, is the good stuff. Because, after all these spiritual metaphors and cosmic judgments, Senet was also about humans being humans. Losing gracefully. Maybe. Kind of. Okay, not always. There's a text from the New Kingdom that includes a passive-aggressive line about a fool who rolls like a donkey. That's a burn, by the way. Top-tier 1300 BC sass. And don't forget the tomb of Pepi II, where his cousin was buried with a board and a note carved beside it. May you always roll with favor and never argue again, which is beautiful and also deeply suspicious. You imagine the cousin had opinions during game night. Maybe they were the kind of person who accidentally moved 2 pawns instead of 1, or conveniently forgot that square 27 meant you had to miss a turn. Or perhaps they were just very loud whenever they landed on the House of Glory. We all know that player. But here's the thing. Senet taught you how to handle that. The board required patience. You couldn't rush it. You couldn't force a win. And when the dice didn't go your way, you had 2 choices. Complain to the gods, or shrug and roll again. You glance down at your own pawn. It's on square 22 now, moving again. Slowly but surely. This one's had a journey. Setbacks, lucky rolls, a few moments of spiritual enlightenment, and 1 accidental detour through the House of Waters. You respect it. You root for it, because you are it. One last fact before your next roll. Some archaeologists believe Senet tournaments were held during temple festivals. Like competitive prayer, you'd play in front of a crowd, sometimes as entertainment, other times as a sacred demonstration. A priest would narrate the moves. She has entered the House of Rebirth. Let the music rise. There might have been wagers, not on who would win, but on how gracefully they'd play. Winning didn't impress the gods, but losing with style, that was divine. You roll again, 1 white. Your pawn steps into square 25, just before the final line. It pauses. So do you, because here's what Senet really taught. In all its dusty, divine elegance, sometimes you get stuck. Sometimes you fall behind. Sometimes you sit on the same square for what feels like forever, while everyone else moves on. And that's okay. Because this game, the real game, was never about getting there first. It was about how you moved. Did you stay kind when you were losing? Did you play with dignity? Did you laugh? Even when things didn't go your way? Then you won, pawn or no pawn. And when you finally do reach the last square, and you will, you won't throw your arms up and cheer. You'll do something much more powerful. You'll smile. You'll whisper, "Good game." And you'll roll one more time, just because. Your last pawn hovers just before the end. Square 29, the House of Glory. One more move, and it will step into the unknown, off the board, beyond the final square. You wait, not out of fear, but reverence, because this moment, this one right here, has weight. You roll the sticks slowly this time, almost ceremonially. They clatter once, twice, then fall still. 3 white, 1 black, a clean 4. You move the pawn forward, 1 square at a time. Square 30, the House of Reunification. And then, nothing. No fireworks. No dramatic music. No booming voice from the heavens shouting, "You win." Just silence. The pawn sits there, still, as if it's always belonged. You let your hands rest at your sides. The board is complete. Every piece has made its journey. And you suddenly feel a little different too, as if, in playing the game, imagining it, feeling it, you've walked a path of your own, quietly, slowly, without even realizing it. Senet always had that effect. It wasn't flashy. It didn't offer fast rewards. It asked you to sit, to roll, to wait, to try again. And maybe, just maybe, to learn something along the way. You think back to everything you've imagined tonight. The priest in the temple, chanting as he plays under the gaze of painted gods. The queen in her tomb, immortalized mid-move, her smile patient and steady. The children in the marketplace, bickering over whose turn it is, pausing only when someone offers food. The lonely pawn stuck in the House of Waters, floating until it's ready. And now, your own board, quiet, complete. The beauty of Senet is that it never demanded perfection, just presence, a willingness to keep going, even when the path seemed unclear, a respect for rules that shifted, a smile for symbols you didn't understand. You learned to trust the board, to let each square teach its lesson, to laugh when the sticks betrayed you, to breathe when they didn't, and to let go when the time came. Maybe that's why the game lasted for over 2,000 years, not because people mastered it, but because they needed it. It offered structure in the chaos, stillness in the noise, a chance to sit quietly and ask the big questions in a small way. What happens after I die? How do I move forward? What if I'm stuck? What does it mean to win? And in response, the board never shouts. It simply lays itself before you, square after square, and waits. You stare at your board one last time. The candle burns low now, barely a whisper. The room is warm, still. You smile and gently reach out, not to roll again, just to touch the final square, the House of Reunification. It's smooth beneath your finger, cool, complete. And then, without fanfare, you let it go. And now, as our story slows to a gentle close, you can rest in the calm that follows the final move. The board is quiet. The pieces are still. Nothing more to play. Nothing more to prove. You've walked alongside ancient priests, noble queens, curious children, and clever merchants. You've rolled the strange stick dice, felt the suspense of the waters, and the relief of rebirth. You've seen the game stretch across kingdoms, through tombs and temples, into quiet homes and dusty courtyards. And in all of it, the game reminded you Life is not a straight line. It winds, it loops, it pauses. Some days, you'll roll high. Other days, you'll get stuck. But every square has meaning. Every move tells a story. Even the waiting is sacred. Let your breath slow now. Let the lessons of the board melt into your muscles, into your bones. You don't need to understand everything to move forward. You don't need to win to be whole. Like the players of ancient Egypt, you've joined something timeless, an invisible thread that connects dreamers, thinkers, and travelers across centuries. So sleep now, little traveler. Let the sands of the Nile soften your path. Let the stars above the temple guide your rest. You've played well, you've moved with care, and the board will be here, always waiting when you're ready to return.